Today, I'm transforming my old Ikea bedspread, yes, the one I've had since college, into a gorgeous, historically inspired zone front gown. A lot of Ikea linens are surprisingly close to the cotton prints used in the late 18th century. My duvet cover has a small floral print that looks perfectly at home in that era. And since I no longer use it on my bed, I thought it would be the ideal fabric for this project. The gown I'm making is a 1790s gown with a zone front. This style features a fitted bodice with fullness gathered in the back of the skirt. The skirt itself is shaped by lots of little pleats that fall from the waist, and the bodice closes at the center front. The zone front refers to a peekaboo area in the front of the bodice, where a contrasting fabric, in my case a beautiful pink silk, peeks through. That same pink silk will also be used for the petticoat. The sleeves are tight-fitting and end either at the wrist or at 3/4 length. The first step is to make the pattern. I used my self-drafted 18th century bodice pattern, which I've shown how to create in a previous video if you want to check that out here. For this project, I extended the pattern down past the waist in the front and added some decorative tabs. I also drew in the curved line for that peekaboo section where the pink silk will go. Next, I cut out the lining using a green quilting cotton I had left over from another project. In hindsight, this wasn't the best choice because the green does show through the floral cotton just a tiny bit. Then, using the lining pieces as a guide, I cut out the floral fabric from the duvet cover. I had to be careful with my placement here because there were some faded and stained areas on the fabric that I wanted to avoid. To construct the bodice, I started by lining the two center back pieces. I tucked the lining and floral fabric in towards each other, making sure the lining was folded slightly more than the floral fabric so it wouldn't show from the front. I sewed it in place at the neckline and then used an English stitch to connect the two pieces at the center back. The stitch is a bit like a fancy whip stitch that runs right along the edge of the fabric, creating a strong seam that can really take a lot of wear. I used the same English stitch method to attach the side back pieces to the center back pieces as well. Not bad for a day's work. Have the back all put together, and doesn't it look so nice? All three seams were that English stitch, and it kind of looks cute from the inside too with like the little bit of the fashion fabric poking through. The one thing that I did notice though is just how like the outside is perfectly smooth, but the inside definitely like there's a bit extra fabric on the lining, and I don't know if that's like a technique issue on my part. I mean, I made the lining, smaller ever so slightly than the outside fashion fabric, so I don't know. But I've got the boning channels here, which I did stitch the boning channels on the machine, but so far everything else has been hand stitched. And look at my little eyelets. I did this one first and it turned out really ugly, and then I did this one, and like somehow in there I figured out how to do, I think that's called a buttonhole stitch, which is what I thought I was doing here, but I don't know. But this one turned out really pretty. For the front pieces, I needed to attach the lining on its own first. I cut notches in the fabric along the curve and pinned the fabric together along the seam line. This is my secret method for sewing accurate curved seams. I've never seen anyone else do it this way, but I find that if I wait until after sewing to put in the notches, the curved seams never align properly. You do have to be very precise and make sure not to cut the notches too far into the fabric. I then sewed this seam by machine. All right, I've sort of got this half and half situation, so I think it's a good time to show you what I've done. So the first step is to attach the front lining piece. And it's a little bit counterintuitive when you do this because the open edge is like this. You want the open edge to be to the outside fabric. because it's going to get covered up later. So it messes me up every time. Just something to kind of like keep in mind, that like the open flappy raw edges go to the same side as your fashion fabric. That's true both for the side seam and for the arm seam up here. And up here, this edge near the neckline needs to get folded backwards to what will be the inside before this gets stitched. And I actually need to go back and like redo this because I did it the wrong way the first time. Again, counterintuitive to what you think it should be. So then once that's attached, you kind of go in and attach the fashion fabric on top of it. So this is the side seam, and you cut the slits in your fabric and then fold the fashion fabric under and sort of like lay it down on top. Go back in with a little tiny prick stitch, which looks like this from the inside. See much bigger stitches on the inside, and just the tiny little almost invisible ones on the outside. Then once you have that in place, you kind of like smooth out from there. You want there to be no bubbles between the fashion fabric and your lining. Smooth that out. I've got a couple pins in here to kind of keep it there. And then I kind of do the same thing, smoothing up the arm. This will we'll need to kind of take this back to fit our sleeve later, but I just kind of want to get like an idea of the placement, an idea of the line for me to fold that under, and I kind of keep folding that under all the way on the top edge here. This I think could get folded back a little bit more, but I'm going to worry about that later. But the next step here is to baste from like about here across the front, so that we can then unpin this up here, take it back, and fit the sleeves. The other thing that is different on this one from the other jackets and 18th century tops that I've made is that because I'm doing the zone front, this will at some point get cut away about like this. So I'm not worrying too much about like how exactly it's fitted here. You'll notice it stops well before my lining ends. That's fine. I think I will eventually like draw my line on and then fold it back, cut the excess off, do the little slits and fold it back. But I think I want to wait to do that until I fit the sleeves and until I make the little pink under area. So like everything from here down underneath will be the pink silk to match the petticoat. And I want to make that first so that I know that when I cut this, that it is going to cover the pink completely. Just don't want to make any mistakes there. Once the front floral piece was attached with a prick stitch, I used my iron to fold back the edges of the lining. Then I laid the lining on top of my pink silk, used the outline to cut the silk, and folded back the edges to match. Again, I folded back a little more of the lining than the pink silk so that the lining would never peek out. And I used the same prick stitch to attach the pink silk to the lining. The next step was the most nerve-wracking, cutting the curved edge into the floral piece. After all of this work, if I cut away too much fabric, it will be a disaster. But I used the edge of the pink silk as my guide, went slow and steady, and did my best to match that line, leaving just enough extra to fold under. I used my machine to sew a row of stay stitching along the curved edge, and this is really helpful for keeping a bias edge from stretching, and it also helps when folding the fabric along that edge. With the stay stitching in place, I can follow the line while folding, making sure to fold over enough so that that stitching is tucked to the back side. Then I use a prick stitch to keep it in place over the lining. Next, I moved on to the sleeves. I patterned the sleeve using a shorter sleeve I had made previously, just adding some length. Using my machine, I sewed the sleeve from the bottom up to the elbow. Then I folded both the lining and floral fabric so that they were right sides together, each on themselves. I set them on top of each other and then sewed all 4 pieces of fabric together at once. This way, when you turn the floral fabric right side out, it brings the lining with it. So you end up with the lining inside the floral outer fabric and all the seams opening toward the inside. This was a common method for sewing sleeves in the 18th century. After that, I hemmed the sleeves by hand and attached them to the bodice in the usual 18th century way. That means trying on the bodice, pinning the sleeves in place at the top over the lining but under the floral fabric. So I've now pinned the rest of the sleeve in place on top of the armband, and then right here and right here it sort of switches to go to the inside. And I left myself a bit too much room on the underside when I was patterning, so I had to kind of like pull it up. I've pinned this so that I can still try it on. So pin goes through here, but then back out the other side so I won't prick myself. I just make sure that the pins don't catch on the sleeve at all, so that I can still kind of have like full range of motion. And it looks pretty dangerous when I hold it up like this, but honestly, when I try it on, there's like 0 chance that these pins are going to prick me. Okay, you guys, I am in love with this pink. I'm so glad that I chose this color. Like, just look at the skirt. Also, well, okay, first, I'll explain what I did. And I didn't film this whole thing because I do have a whole video on how to make 18th century petticoats. So go watch that if you want the detailed in-depth view. But basically, I have my petticoat pleated, I have it on the dress form, and then I have this waist tape that is going around. And then you just kind of pay attention to the bottom and tug on the top so that it is even all the way around. I think this looks really cute, like this like pleat up to the under bust line. I would love to make more of like a modern dress that had this detail where there were like pleats and then almost pleats that are stitched down to the waist and then some sort of, you know, something else up at the top. But wouldn't that be like just the prettiest little modern ball gown type of situation? I might have to get more pink fabric and make a dress like this because she's pretty. For the Italian gown skirt, I started by doing a narrow hem by hand. Then I measured how wide my bodice was at the point where I wanted to attach the skirt. I made tiny knife pleats in the skirt fabric, all facing toward the center back. This multitude of pleats is one of the most beautiful features of the Italian gown, and it looks absolutely delightful when spread out over the bum padding. Just wait until you see the finished gown. Next, I folded under the bottom edge of the bodice and ironed it flat to prepare for attaching the skirt. So I'm really not at all certain how I'm supposed to be attaching the skirt to the bodice. Not sure how I am supposed to know like where to attach the bodice to the skirt. But let me show you what I'm doing, and this may or may not be right. So I've got my skirt laid out with all the pleats in place. I've got the pleats pinned here, and then I ironed them so they'd be like nice and crisp. And then I just I'm laying this over the top and stitching it in place. This side is already stitched, like just a basting stitch for now. But as far as like how I knew where to place the bodice on this fabric, what I did is I laid it out flat, like straight. Then I took my petticoat, which I had already like fitted to myself. I took the back side of the petticoat, because this is the back side of the gown, and I made sure that the bottoms were even in the center and kind of like pulled it up to the top here. And then I pulled it up just like a little bit further because I want the gown to be a little longer than the petticoat. And that is where I got sort of like the waistline. So not the bottom, right? Like not where the point is, but the actual waistline. So kind of like the highest point, I guess. So it's kind of a big old guesstimate. And I don't really know if it's going to turn out good, but all the American Duchess book said was sew the bodice onto the skirt. And I was like, well, what? That's not helpful at all. So that's what I'm doing, but I'm basting it in place first, and then I will try it on and see if it looks good. Okay, I'm happy to report after the initial try on that method did in fact work perfectly for attaching the skirt, but I'm not going to show you that footage yet because I feel like it'd be a little bit too much of a reveal. So wait just a few more minutes till we get done with the details, and then you can see it. The final touch was adding some ruched strips of pink silk to the bodice for decoration and to help the zone front edge stand out from the petticoat below. I used pinking shears on the edges of the silk strips, gathered them by hand, and then tacked them onto the gown. This gown is without a doubt my favorite thing I've ever made. I love the floral fabric just as much as I did in college when it was in my bedroom, and now I get to wear it as a dress. All the details turned out perfectly, from the little pleats on the back of the skirt to the zone front and the ruche decorations. It fits beautifully, is incredibly flattering, and I think it matches my personality to a T. If you enjoy this transformation and want to see more historical sewing adventures, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.